Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you a basic formula I use to spray my tomato plants down when I start to see early blight come in. A lot of times I don't even apply a spray to my plants because really applying any kind of a spray at any time really doesn't do a whole lot for your plants once you start seeing early or late blight come in, especially late blight, because late blight is generally a subsoil borne fungus disease, and it's very difficult to even attempt to treat. Whereas early blight is really a surface-borne disease, and if you see early blight or anthracnose or black spot septoria or any of those kind of diseases, they're normally surface type of fungals that will get on your plant, and you can relatively treat them, and you're not going to cure it. That's the thing. You're just going to slow it down, and you're going to slow it down enough where your plant can continue to grow vigorously and really get on those tomatoes and start getting those tomatoes produced. And that's really the whole idea. You're not going to cure it. There's no cure for early blight. Now, I've tried everything out there known to man, and nothing cures early blight, late blight, or even anthracnose or any of those kind of diseases with tomato plants. Once your tomatoes start getting it, it's pretty much game over. Really, the only way to really deal with any of these diseases, like professional tomato farmers and everything, what they do is there's a seasonal forecast. You got to call your local extension, and there's a forecast, and they tell you when you got to spray, and there's a window in which you need to plant your plants to avoid the late blight. It's a whole thing, is a timing thing. You have to pre-spray, you have to pre-do this. There's all these things you got to do, and you can pretty much grow an entire acre of tomatoes without getting blight on one single tomato. But this whole procedure has to be followed, and it's pretty extensive. It's not your normal backyard gardener type thing, though a lot of the practices should be applied in gardening. It's going to take a while for you to actually start to incorporate that into your normal gardening behavior, your normal gardening routines, because it's outside of what you would normally do. There's a season when early blight starts to rear its ugly head, so to speak, and you want to either plant before it or just after that or something like that. It's either before it or after it, and then with the sprays that you put down on the surface of the ground, puts it in check, if not kills it, and then when you plant your tomatoes, you don't get it. So you could look into that if you want. It's a very complicated procedure, and it's very time consuming, and you really got to be dedicated. You really got to be a tomato farmer to really want to actually go to that level. But that's something that they do. But what I do in the meantime is I do treat my tomato plants from time to time, and this is one of those times that I really feel I really need to stay on top of it this year, because I really want to get a good harvest this year and not let the blight ruin my tomato crop like it pretty much does every year, and it's probably going to do this year again anyway, but at least I can slow it down. So I use a mixture of a few things to help make this whole thing possible. So one of the things that I use is I add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. I add about a tablespoon of baking soda, about a half a tablespoon of soap. It's recommended you use Castile soap, but Castile soap is like $10 a bottle. I mean, you can use whatever you want, but Castile soap is probably the most organic and best thing to use. I just use about a half a teaspoon of this. The only purpose for the soap is to dissolve the oil. Whatever oil you're going to use, you want to add a little oil, whether it's vegetable oil or this oil, that oil. I use neem oil because neem oil has multi-purpose, and what the neem oil does or any oil does, is it allows the baking soda to kind of stick to the leaf. It doesn't wash off right away. It kind of sticks there for a while, and that you absolutely have to do, because if you just take baking soda, mix it with water, and spray it on your plants, it's gone the next day. It has to be dissolved into something like an oil, and be able to stick on a leaf for a couple of days, because especially where I live, we get morning dew that is so thick it's literally like a cloud here. Like the clouds come from the ground. I did a video about that. And so the clouds literally, when I look out my window, it looks like a fog. But so much water gets condensed out of that it looks like it just rained. So it's like that every single day. And because of that reason, I have blight problems. But that's a side note. But you need to have something to keep that baking soda on the plant. And the soap is just to make the oil break up and dissolve into the water. If you don't have soap, it's not going to dissolve. This is going to just beat up in the water. It's going to separate. It's not going to infuse in the water. So you need the soap to diffuse the oil, and you need the oil to make the baking soda stick. All right, now the purpose of the hydrogen peroxide is just to sanitize things a little bit if there's any surface bacteria or any surface things. It helps sanitize the leaf as well as you're spraying it. So you don't have to add that. I just add a little bit to it just for an added benefit, really. The other thing I add to this is I add a tablespoon of Epsom salt. It's not there to prevent any kind of diseases. It doesn't really do anything, at least as far as I know. I am foliar feeding my tomato plants with a little bit of Epsom salt, which really gives them a good boost, kind of gives them some color right away. And so I just add a little bit of Epsom salt just for an immune booster, tomato elixir, if you want to put it that way. And that's the only reason why I add that. All right, so the other thing that I add is I add 1 crushed aspirin. And the aspirin triggers a tomato defense response. And I don't do that very often, not every single time. I only add that one time initially, and that's it. I don't really add it very often. It's not recommended to use that too often. You just need to cause the tomatoes to go into that response mode where it's protecting itself, and it goes into this defensive mode, and it releases a chemical. I forgot what the chemical is offhand. Salicylic acid or something like that. I don't remember. It releases a chemical, and that chemical protects the plant. And so that's the only reason why I add 1 aspirin per gallon. Now we'll get into the measurements in a minute. And so that's what I generally use as a spray for my tomato plants. And now, I don't use every one of these things every single time I spray my plants. When it comes to this time of the year and I have to start spraying, I usually spray about every other day, because up here, like I told you, it rains almost every day. You have to reapply this every time it rains, or every time you wet down your plants and you wash everything down into the soil. You pretty much got to reapply it every single time. And or if it doesn't rain, it's been sunny out and no fog, no watering or whatever, you can apply it once a week. They say sometimes twice a week, but that might be too much, and it's a lot of work to do, because I'm going to show you how I apply it. Once you see how I apply it, you'll understand why I kind of veer away from doing it, because it is a lot of work and it's very time consuming. It could take me up to 3 to 4 hours just to do 30 tomato plants. So it's got to be done very thoroughly, or it's not going to be effective at all. Don't even waste your time doing it unless you do it the way that I'm basically going to show you. I also use this sprayer as well. You can get these for like $10 at like Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that, or even maybe Walmart. You get them for like $10 or $15. You get like a 1.5 gallons, really all you need. I usually mix about a gallon or about a gallon plus. I go a little higher with it so it's a little bit more diluted, and just to make sure that I'm not going to burn anything. And let's get these measured up. We'll mix it in there. Okay, so let's talk about the measurements that I'm using. We have 1 aspirin. We got about a heavy tablespoon of Epsom salt. You can go a little more, a little less. I basically use one of these containers, and there's like a line on it. I fill that up to that line. I'm not sure if that's an exact tablespoon or 2 tablespoons. I just go up to that line, and that's what you see right there. That is the Epsom salt, that is the aspirin, and this is the baking soda. I add 1 tablespoon, like this type of tablespoon. See? I add that, nice and flush with the top, not over, not under, just make it nice and even. We're going to add about a capful of this, but I'm not going to, I don't really want to spread it out too much, because it's going to end up spilling all over the place. But I'll add a capful. I'll show you me doing that. And we're going to add I think this is a teaspoon. That should be about a teaspoon of soap. That's just enough to break up the oil. And the oil, I'm going to add a tablespoon of oil, but I'm going to make it a little bit on the heavy side. So normally I do it kind of by eye, but I'm going to show you what I do. All right, so first thing we want to do is add our soap, like that. Just let it drip for a second. Then we're going to pour our, I could probably even use the same thing for the soap, just to get that excess soap out of here. We're going to add about that much of the hydrogen peroxide, which is fine. A little more, a little less ain't going to make a difference. It's not going to hurt nothing. It's hydrogen peroxide. It's basically one extra oxygen molecule in water. So we add about that much hydrogen peroxide. Very little. Very, very little. Now we're going to add this, which I think I'm going to be able to do in one sweep with a camera in my hand. This ought to be challenging. Alright. Let's see if we can do this here. I don't care if they combine at this point, because you can see what I'm doing. Alright. Just take that stuff like that. Get all that aspirin in there. Okay, so remember, it's just 1 aspirin per gallon. Don't never add any more to that. 1 aspirin per gallon. I go a little heavier than a gallon, like 1.25 gallons. So it's really spread out. It's really not going to do any damage. I can spray this stuff on twice a day if I want to. It's really not going to do a lot of damage to the plant, though I do not recommend spraying it twice a day. I generally spray it whenever either it rains, about every 3 days. I really go by what I see on the plants, and I'm going to show you how I spray it depending on what my plants are doing. So it's not exactly the same thing all the time. Now, let's put the neem oil in there before I forget, because I do like to get yapping. See, it's spilling all over the place, making a big mess. Let that drain for a second. There's nothing I could do. You know, when you're filming like this, why do I get a tripod? Guys, it's hard enough just getting the camera out here and remembering that I got to shoot video. Forget about me dragging tripods. It's just too much for me. And I'm just going to go a little extra on this. I usually like to go about maybe a tablespoon, a little bit heavier. I'm going to do a video on this neem oil. I really like that neem oil. I'm big on that neem oil. And I just let that drain in there for a couple of minutes, and that's generally what I do. And then from there, I fill it with water, like I said, to about 1 gallon, 1.25 gallons, a little, probably more like 1.25 gallons. Once you put everything in there and the water's in there, thrash it around really good and let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. Then come back and thrash it around again, really, really good. Then let it sit again for about another 5 minutes. Let all that foam and bubbles slowly start to taper down again. But you want to let it sit a little bit so all those powders can fully dissolve into the water, along with the oil getting diffused and infused with the water. So you really got to let it sit for a few minutes. Don't put it right in there, one shake, and it goes run into the garden to spray. Let it sit for a while. It'll be fine. When you get time, you spray. With these sprayers, do not use anything other than what you're using in it. So generally, I use this sprayer for just basic organic stuff. Neem oil, epsom salt, hydrogen peroxide, stuff that's not, I'm going to be applying to the surface of the plants. I'm not worried about contamination or anything. Do not use fungicides or pesticides in the same container. You buy a separate container. They're only $10. You buy a separate one. You spray it like yellow or something. You make it so you know that that one is used specifically for pesticides and fungicides and chemicals like that. Do not use your sprayer, your normal foliage feeder sprayer, because I also use this for foliar feeding, and I foliar feed with this product. This is a great product. I'm very, very excited about this product. I'm going to do a review on this stuff next. This stuff is absolutely incredible. And you foliar feed with this, and there's instructions on here how to foliar feed. You don't want it too strong, you don't want it too light, but just enough. And this whole little thing, you add a little bit of Epsom salt to that, and this is incredible stuff. So we'll get into that in another video, but I use that generally for foliar feeding and spraying and treating with natural organic stuff in my garden when I have to spray, like for funguses and stuff. All right, so don't use that for anything other than that. Trust me on that. You'll be sorry if you did. Because those chemicals like copper, those copper sulfates, they don't come out of that stuff is in there, and it's always a residual. You don't want that every single time you water your plants. It starts causing problems. The next thing we'll do is we're going to show you how I apply it. So I'll see you in the garden. Okay, so we're going to spray one plant for you and kind of show you how I do my sprays on my plants just to keep them nice and healthy like this. So first thing I do is I start down below, and as you can see, I'm spraying the ground. Yes, that's right. We are putting a coating of neem oil as well as baking soda and all that other good stuff that I put in there on the ground, on the wood chips. And this will get soaked a lot more than what you see here. I'm just showing you really quickly so you get an idea on how thorough you have to be when you spray. Okay, look how far away from the plant I'm going. You see what I'm doing? All the way around, guys. And you got to get in there pretty good. You want to get under the wood chips. You want to soak that really good, especially around the base of the plant. Let me see here. I'm sorry, you're out of frame. All right, you want to make sure you get that ground really good. You don't have to start doing the ground. A lot of times what I do is I start spraying the plant first, and then as I spray the plant, it drips, and then it soaks, and then I just spray around where it didn't soak. So what I do is when you're spraying your plants, you generally want to get it really good. You want to make sure you get the stem underneath the leaf all the way, every leaf, every stem. Everything has to get completely covered with this concoction you made. Top of the leaf, bottom of the leaf, soak it. Don't worry about it. You can make 10 more mixes if you need to. You're not going to poison the plant. You're not going to damage it. You're generally going to be okay. Though, what my suggestion to you is, because some people suggest that you do a small sample first, just to make sure that you didn't burn your plants. What I would suggest you do, in my particular case, you can see how I'm doing this, by the way. Now I'm on one side of the plant doing this. So what I would suggest you do is when you first spray your plants, you only spray the lower part of your plant at first and see how your plant responds to that. If it responds good, you don't see any major burning and the plant dying or anything like that, then you can proceed to go to the top of the plant and spray that. If the bottom plant drops the leaves or burns the leaves off, we're going to remove them leaves because of the blight anyway. So we want to see how the blight is actually going to respond to your spray, and that's the only reason why you don't want to remove all the blighted leaves. You want to leave a few of them on there just to see if the blight stays in check. And you want to monitor that and keep an eye on what your plants are actually doing with the blight and how it's handling it. Now, remember, this particular chemical that I made in this batch has aspirin in it too, so it's also going to trigger a major response to it. You know, it's going to build that chemical and all that. So let's see here. Now, once I get one side of the plant, then I go to the other side of the plant and I do it all over again. I make sure I get all sides of it, everything. The stem, the leaves, the spray. Now, I'm doing the top of the plant because I already checked and my plants responded fine to my spray, and they're doing quite well. So we're going to continue to spray the upper part of my plant. But my suggestion to you is when you first start spraying, start with the lower part of the plant and see what happens. The lower plant doesn't die off or leaves are burning off and shriveling up and turning brown and dropping off, then you can proceed to the upper part of the plant and spray that as well. So for me right now, I am going to spray the whole plant. But for you, you're going to start slow. Make sure you get the spray on the metal cages and everything. Everything around this tomato plant has to be sprayed and covered in this neem oil mix. Okay? Everything. You want this plant thoroughly. I might use 1/4 of a gallon on one plant. That's how much thoroughly I spray this thing. I make sure every leaf gets sprayed. top and bottom. You want to get the bottom of the leaf, you just turn it upside down like so, and spray just like that. I do it all. You have to do it this way, because if you do not do it this way, this is going to get worse and worse. You'll lose your plants within a week to 2 weeks. You'll pretty much, all the leaves will be off your plant. You ain't going to get good tasting tomatoes. So you really need to really go the extra mile here. And mainly the most important part of doing this is, you're out of frame. The most important part of doing this is actually getting the underneath of the leaf, because this is where the early blight gets its hold on. Late blight's kind of a different story. Once you get late blight, it's probably already in the vascular system of the plant. And if that happens, then, no matter what you spray on it, it's just going to kill it anyway. So it looks like we got this one pretty good. We want to make sure we get underneath all the, everything around here gets sprayed. You see how the whole ground is soaking wet now? That's what you want to see. Every single plant all the way around has to be completely sprayed. Now, you might think that this is being a little excessive. If you want to make it to the end of the season with decent tomatoes and a decent harvest, you're going to have to be excessive, unfortunately. There's no other way around it. There's no cure to these diseases. The only thing we're doing now is we're slowing it down, and we're also feeding it too at the same time, because remember I added the Epsom salt in there. And if you really wanted to, you could probably add a little bit of that worm casting juice, or a compost tea, if you want to add a little bit of that and spray it in and kind of feed them with that too. You could feed them. You could do that too. This is mainly not to feed them. I will actually come out here specifically when I'm ready to foliar feed. I will come out here and make a concoction specifically to foliar feed, and I'll spray them with that foliar feed. I don't want to combine too many things. The only purpose for the Epsom salt is it really does give the plants a really nice boost, and they really like it. They really like that Epsom salt spray on the leaves. It's very lightly too, because I have Epsom salt in the soil. I water them with Epsom salt, so giving them that little boost to the leaves is just a nice little immune booster for the plant. All right, so that's basically it. You've seen how much I stood here and sprayed this thing. Probably used half my spray on this one plant for you. And again, you want to make sure you get all the way, see how I'm going all the way outside of it? You need to spray everything, because the whole surface of the ground is covered with this early blight. Okay, again, if it's late blight, you're going to have a problem with that, because that's a soil-borne disease, and that's going to live deeper down in the soil. So you really need to, in advance, be proactive before you even plant your plant. You want to make sure there's a good amount of lime in the soil to prevent the late blight from spreading underneath the soil. And as far as the surface part of it goes, well, you're hitting it up this way, and you're going to get all the big ones, the Anthracnose, the black spot septoria, the early blight, and all of those kind of things, powdery mildews. You get them all. And as long as if you do that and you do it once a week, you should be okay. Again, you're not going to get rid of it. It's an airborne, I try to explain this to people. Early blight is airborne as well as comes from the ground. So it's going to blow in from the wind from the outside, and this is only going to slow it down in a sense where it's not going to kill it, but it's going to keep coming back, and it can't really take its root, get a hold or take its roots up on your leaves when you got a good amount of neem oil on it, and you got a little baking soda in there, and the plant's already going into its defensive mode, producing a chemical, so it really starts to fight it off. And so you give that tomato plant a really good chance to, to survive some of this for the season anyway. At least if you can make it till, mid-September with your tomato plants, where you minimize the damage from the blight, well, that's a success, guys, because in the end, who really cares anyway, because you're going to rip the plants down soon anyway, so who really cares? So if the blight wants to win in the end, that's it. Now, the other thing you need to do is at the end of the year, and you see the blight coming in, you're done with your tomatoes, rip those plants down, dig up that soil, get those roots out of there, take those plants and burn them. Do not keep your old tomato plants. Never compost your old tomato plants. Always burn your old tomato plants. Get them in a pile, let them dry out, and then when they're fully dried out, you dump a little gasoline on them and burn them up. You don't want that material ever in your compost pile or anywhere, because tomatoes are one of the few plants that will literally harbinger I don't know how many different types of disease, everything from viruses to fungi diseases to bacterial diseases. You want to absolutely destroy your old tomato plant parts. Do not compost them. And as far as the soil goes, you're going to lime those holes. After you pull the tomato plants out, you're going to lime up those holes, and you're going to leave the mounds just the way they are, your dirt. And then next year, if you decide to till or you're doing something else, you add a little more lime to it, add some wood ash to the soil, and that'll keep it nice and balanced. But that lime will kind of really work on the late blight if I'm getting a hold subsurface soil-wise. And that's really it. That's really the only way to deal with it, other than the method I talked about earlier that the farmers use. The planting cycle. There's certain cycles. If you plant your tomatoes out after the initial bloom of the blight, there's a certain time you plant that. If you can get that right, you won't get blight on your tomatoes. And so the farmers have to follow a very strict calendar regimen when it comes to that every year. Now, how you get that information and access to it, I was told your local extensions know all that stuff. So they're going to know when the blight season is going to be from year to year. It's always different. So you need to find that schedule out, what your planting schedule time is for tomatoes and all that, and you do it exactly what they say, and you will generally not get blight on your tomatoes, believe it or not. Or it'll come in really late in the season, because the plant's already, 4 or 5 feet tall, tomatoes are on it, and then the blight just starts now. The blight's not going to get a hold of your tomato. You already got tomatoes. And that's the idea, is to outpace the blight. That's the whole technique there. So that's a technique I'm going to incorporate in the future more, but right now, I need to do this because I'm just the way I like to do it, and it does work. It's just a lot of work. All right, so enough rambling from me. Get out into your gardens, start spraying them down for the blight. Share your experiences, share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.